Ladies and gentlemen, let us dissect this nonsense properly, because what this video presents is not an argument. It is a sentimental sales pitch for reproduction wrapped in culture war grievance and hormonal mysticism. Its central thesis is that men seeing a cute robot child in a video game and suddenly fantasizing about fatherhood somehow proves the beauty, legitimacy, and wholesomeness of reproductive desire. No. What it proves is that human beings are highly susceptible to emotional manipulation through parental imagery. That is not profound. It is marketing. Corporations have known for decades that pairing vulnerable child figures with protective fantasy triggers strong emotional responses. It works in films, in games, in advertising, in political propaganda, and in military recruitment. A game making lonely men feel paternal toward an engineered child character is not evidence of moral truth. It is evidence that human psychology is embarrassingly hackable. Yet she treats this Pavlovian response as though God himself descended from the heavens and whispered, "Behold, fatherhood." Pathetic. Then she repeatedly insists this paternal urge is beautiful, wholesome, and the meaning of life. Notice the trick. She never argues that reproduction is ethical. She never even attempts to justify creating a person. She merely points out that many people feel a strong desire to do it, then wraps that desire in glowing adjectives until the audience mistakes emotional resonance for moral reasoning. That is not philosophy. That is perfume on instinct. The antinatalist objection is not, and has never been, people do not want children. Of course they do. The objection is that wanting something does not justify imposing its costs on another. You may desperately want a dog. That does not justify stealing one. You may desperately want sex. That does not justify coercion. You may desperately want emotional fulfillment. That does not justify creating a vulnerable mortal consciousness to provide it, and that is precisely what procreation is. Her entire video avoids this point because it destroys the whole enterprise. The child does not exist prior to creation. Therefore, the child cannot benefit from being created before creation. Therefore, procreation cannot be for the child's sake. Therefore, it is necessarily for the sake of the parent or others. That is the trap pronatalists can never escape. Every single reason she gives for parenthood is parent-centered. Meaning, legacy, purpose, family, grandchildren, fulfillment, emotional richness, a little daughter drawing pictures for the fridge. Not one of these is a justification from the child's perspective. Because there is no child's perspective beforehand. There is only adult desire. Then she moves into the classic pronatalist highlight reel: pancakes, crayon drawings, little daughters, and tender moments, family warmth. Again, this is not argument. This is advertising. It is a trailer for existence. Where is the footage of the child learning what death is and crying at night? Where is the footage of school bullying? Where's the footage of panic disorders, abusive relationships, terminal diagnoses, funerals, debt, heartbreak, existential despair, loneliness, or catastrophic injury? Nowhere. Because pronatalism always markets the Kodak moments while concealing the invoice. Then comes her claim that the good parts outweigh the bad. By what metric? For whom? According to whom? That is a subjective assertion made by someone already committed to life. It proves nothing. Many people conclude their suffering outweighs their joys. Millions live lives they would never willingly repeat. Millions suffer chronic pain, depression, disability, poverty, abuse, war, trauma, or despair. Even many relatively fortunate people privately admit life is exhausting, frightening, and filled with burdens they never asked for. Her response to all of this is effectively, "Well, I think the good parts are worth it." Marvelous. Then enjoy your own life. That does not entitle you to make that gamble on behalf of someone else. That is the core moral issue she refuses to face. Procreation is non-consensual risk imposition. You are making the most consequential decision possible for another being. Without their consent, for reasons that satisfy your own desires. And if the life goes badly, too bad. No refunds, no undo button, no, sorry, turns out I overestimated how much you'd enjoy existence. Then we get the astonishingly stupid ancestral argument. Your ancestors survived war and famine, and you're ending the bloodline because rent is high. Yes, gladly. My ancestors surviving suffering does not create a duty to continue suffering. Their endurance is not a moral command. Dead people do not own the future. The fact that previous generations reproduced under miserable conditions is not evidence that reproduction is good. It is evidence that biological drives override rational restraint with alarming efficiency. Then she calls anti-natalist ideas propaganda. No, dear, the anti-natalist argument is not propaganda simply because it makes you uncomfortable. Pointing out that life contains unavoidable suffering, that no one consents to being born, and that procreation imposes risk for non-necessary reasons is not propaganda. It is ethical analysis. You simply dislike the conclusions. Then she attempts to psychologize critics. Childless women are coping. They are sad. They are overcompensating, and they secretly regret it. They are crabs in a bucket. Observe again, no rebuttal, only pathologizing dissent. This is the rhetorical behavior of someone who cannot answer criticism and thus resorts to amateur psychoanalysis. And then, perhaps most revealingly, she claims that anti-natalist rhetoric discouraging parenthood is harmful because young people should not be taught to reject family life. Why? If the position is wrong, refute it. If it is weak, defeat it. But instead, she treats criticism of reproduction itself as dangerous contamination. Why? Because pronatalism depends on treating reproduction as sacred and unquestionable. The moment people begin examining it ethically rather than emotionally, the whole structure starts wobbling. Then we reach the final absurdity. Her insistence that the longing for family represents touch with your humanity, while critics are miserable freaks who want to destroy everything pure and wholesome. There it is. The mask slips. Not argument, not evidence, just tribal moralizing. If you want children, you are pure. If you question procreation, you are broken. How convenient, how primitive, how intellectually bankrupt. The truth is much simpler. Wanting children is understandable. It is natural. It is emotionally powerful. It is biologically ingrained. And it may still be morally indefensible. And those facts coexist perfectly well. Natural does not mean ethical. Common does not mean justified. Emotionally resonant does not mean morally sound. And yes, if one believes that creating a person exposes them to inevitable harm, suffering, and death for the satisfaction of parental desire, then one may reasonably conclude not merely that procreation is wrong, but that the desire driving it is ethically ugly. Because what is that desire in substance? I want someone else to exist so that my life feels more meaningful. That is not selflessness. That is not transcendence. That is not love. That is existential neediness weaponized into biology. A non-existent being loses nothing by never existing. But once created, they can lose everything. And you do not get to impose that gamble merely because a video game made your ovaries or testicles vibrate with sentimentality. So no, her video does not prove parenthood is beautiful. It proves only this, that humans remain astonishingly vulnerable to romanticizing their deepest instincts and mistaking emotional intensity for ethical legitimacy. A feeling can be ancient, a feeling can be widespread, a feeling can be beautiful, and a feeling can still be monstrous when acted upon. Humanity's oldest moral error has always been confusing what I desperately want with what I have the right to do, and nowhere is that confusion more normalized than in procreation.